So I did send everybody a copy of the agenda that you're seeing on the screen so that you can use that as a guideline of what we're going to walk through today. But we are going to kind of drive through this live in a demo database so that you can see it firsthand instead of just looking at a lot of documentation. So in the agenda, you will see some links that are hyperlinks for you to take you to different sections of the SSDT manual or to the LACA website to documentation that is available for you in those places. So for instance, the new contract chapter of the SSDT manual explains a lot of the options that we're going to look at today. So if you need more information or you're questioning something, you can come here and look at the new contract maintenance area if you're on that tab, or the mass copy area if you're on that tab, or the import section if you're trying to import new contracts. So this is a very useful resource. So we did give you that hyperlink. Remember, you can also access it from inside your database. And the next link that we have there is for the new contract checklist, which is also SSDT manual. And our outline pretty much goes in the same order as this checklist today. So we're going to start out looking at job calendars in our demo database and talking about those. And then we'll go into the new contract area of the redesign and look at, we did reorder these. We're just going to work left to right through the tabs. The new contract maintenance tab first, then we'll look at mass copy compensations, then we'll look at importing new contracts. We will look at some reports that are available for you as you're working on new contracts, and we will talk about activating your new contracts and have a little bit of a discussion about timing and some things that you need to consider when activating. And then we'll look at non-contract compensations after that. So we are going to hit on all of these items that are in the new contract checklist, just maybe in a slightly different order, while we are driving in our test database today. And then we will also talk about how you can create your salary notices from the redesign. So just remember that that new contract checklist out there in the SSDT manual is going to be very helpful. And if you want to maybe have it up on another screen as you're watching the Zoom today, it's probably even going to have a lot of that, information that we're going to discuss. So that's kind of documenting it for you. And you might even want to print that out as you go through this process this year. So the other links that we have in the agenda, we have the purge worksheet that's on the LACA website that we'll look at, and a salary notice document that we put on the LACA website to help you with that process. So let's go ahead and hop into a database, which I was logged into this morning. So let me see. Yep, I'm still logged in. So I am in a test database, and again, remember, you can get to your manual over here by going to help and selecting documentation.
Harry, you might want to drag that over to your other screen. We're still seeing the agenda.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Are you seeing that now? The redesign database?
Got it.
Okay, thanks. So logged into a redesign database, remember that you have the help option up here where you can click documentation and jump directly into the SSDT manual. And you can also get to the public shared reports library, which there are a few new contract reports in the report library. But as you'll see as we go through this training today, there are also several reports available for you directly in the software on the report menu and in the report manager. So I'm not sure that you'll need these, but just remember that other ITCs and SSDT frequently share reports and post these out here. So if you're looking for something else, you may not have to write a report from scratch. You may be able to come out here, click the example, take a look at what these reports may look like, and then click the JSON link to download that report and upload it into your report manager. So just keep that in mind that there's additional reports out there if you don't find what you need on the reports that we show you today. So that first step on the new contract checklist was to work on your job calendars for next year, which we talked about this at the last payroll roundtable, so you may have already started this, but we just want to show you what this looks like in the software. So we're going to go ahead and walk through a couple of these options if you haven't started it or if you haven't seen it in the redesign yet. And we always, even in Classic, talked about building job calendars near the end of this fiscal year for next year in preparation of running those next year payrolls and just getting that out of the way. But in redesign, it's also important that your job calendars are done for the entire next year before you work on your new contracts, because the redesign is looking at those calendars to count the number of work days that are going to be on those new contracts. So the redesign is calculating a little bit more instead of you manually entering work days on job screen. The redesign is calculating that and pulling that into the compensation record for you. So that's why this is actually on the new contract checklist, to do this first, just so that all of your calculations work out fine. So if you're wanting to update an existing calendar for next year, you would come here to your job calendars grid, find that existing calendar that you already have for the current year, click edit, and add some days for next year. So you can see we have days on here for this year, but if I scroll ahead, I don't have any days for next year yet. So the quick way to do that is to use this date range here and select your day type, which you're going to want to populate work days for the most part. You can include weekends if that's applicable to the calendar that you're working on, and then click mass update. And when you do that, it goes out and populates days on this calendar for that date range that you specified. So instead of you having to modify every individual day to be a work day, the system is doing that for you based on the date range you enter. So that's gonna work away for a little bit. You can see the blue bar at the top while it's working on that. And then when that completes, we'll take a look at that. And at that point in time, you could verify how many days it added, make sure it's the correct number of days, and make any modifications to that total day count or to holidays or non-work days that aren't populated by the system. So you can see that completed. So I now have, my typical work days. Let me just expand this in case that makes it easier for you guys to see. And I could take a look here at my new next year date range in my custom date range. And it's going to show you that it added 261 work days to the calendar. So if you were aiming for 260, there's one too many. So at your district, you have some sort of policy or procedure on what you do if you pay everybody for an extra day, or if you give them a non-work day somewhere. But so you would go, make modifications to holidays, maybe make a non-work day somewhere so that total day count is adding up right, make those modifications, and when you're done, click save. So of course you would have, more holidays and stuff to add, but that should give you the idea of how simple it is in Redesign to extend a current calendar for the next year. And I like this little day count totals grid at the top right in the custom date range that you can enter so that you can verify what you're doing as you're working on it. We'll look at the calendar report in a minute, where you can still use that for verification purposes as well. So once you build, a basic calendar, if there are other calendars that are similar to it, I'm just going to X out of here. We have a copy button at the top of the grid. If you click that, you can say, let's copy from that calendar that I just updated for next year. And there are a couple other calendars that are similar. So let's select them from my available calendars on the left and move them over to the right and hit copy. And this will copy all of those workdays and holidays to those other calendars that I could then pull up and edit even further if they're just slightly different. So, maybe they get a different non-work day or something. I don't know. Whoops, I did that wrong. Or maybe they have different holidays. Whatever the case may be, you would make the modifications to that other calendar that you just quickly populated by copying from the other calendar. You could verify your totals at the top right. And once you are happy, click Save. Also at the top of the grid, you see the Create option. So if you have a brand new calendar that is not currently in your grid, it's one that you're adding for next year that you've never had before, you would click the Create option and actually create a new calendar type. Enter your desired description and still populate the days the same way that we just did, and verify the days and save. So you may need to do that, but for the most part, I think most of you will just be extending current calendars. There's also a mass change button at the top of the grid, which you may have used to update calamity days recently, but you could also use this to update holidays or work days if you need to. So on those 3 calendars that we just built, maybe we forgot to update the holiday for Labor Day. And instead of going to each one individually and editing it, you could come here and say, make September 6th be a holiday on these 3 calendars. And then that updated that as well. You could go verify that if you wanted, but so there's that holiday that I just mass changed on multiple calendars. And that would also change your holiday count up here at the top. So we also mentioned that there is a job calendar report. If you go to the reports menu and select job calendar report, you can also verify days by running this report. So I'm just going to go ahead and run the next year's date range that I was working on for those 3 calendars that I was editing. And here you have the job calendar report. Are you seeing the report on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure since that popped up in Adobe. So here is an example of the job calendar report showing all of those work days and holidays that we just created. You could scroll to the bottom of each calendar and see your totals here, verify that those were correct, and then there's a page break and it starts with the next calendar for you to verify or print and keep for your records, or send to employees. So whatever the case may be. One calendar that that you don't have to worry about in Redesign that you did have to worry about in Classic is the default calendar. As long as your default calendar exists, which it should have imported over from Classic. So back in the job calendar grid, here's my default calendar. And you don't have to go add blank months for the upcoming year because it just kind of does it automatically. So just make sure you're not adding like work days or holidays to the default calendar. It's still supposed to be a calendar with no work days, but you don't really have to do anything with it in Redesign, even though you did have to in Classic. As you are building these calendars, one thing that I would like you to think about is whatever the first work day is for the new year. So like on the calendar we built July 1st as the first work day. You want to make sure that that work day is not in the current compensation date range. So your compensation start and stop dates that are on the FY21 compensation records, you want to make sure their stop date is prior to the first work day. So I was looking at a 260-day calendar, so your compensation stop date on most of those is most likely June 30th. So you probably won't have any issues with that. But just keep that in mind as you're building like your teacher calendars. What's that compensation stop date that you put on the FY21 compensation records? And it needs to be not including any new days for the new year. Because remember I said compensation records, look at the calendar to count the number of work days in that compensation date range for your contract year. So if you add a work day during the FY21 compensation date range, it would increase the work days for FY21. So I just want you to be careful about that and think through that. Maybe go to core compensation and look at a couple of your compensation records for teachers, principals, guidance counselors, and see what compensation stop date you have on them for FY21. And if you have any concerns with that, give us a call. We just want to make sure that the days for the right year get on the right compensation record.
Carrie, I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have compensation stop dates in for anyone.
So there's possibly an option for us to help you mass change that. Have you already started building your calendars?
Yeah, I already built all my calendars a few weeks ago.
Okay. And this also may not be a problem for you since you just converted from Classic.
Okay.
Because the type of legacy, which all of your contracts would currently be set up as legacy because they imported over from Classic.
Okay.
They do not recalculate automatically because the programmers are aware that, some of those things aren't working exactly the same in Classic as Redesign. So the contract work days does not automatically recalculate on a legacy contract.
Okay.
So as long as you haven't built a new contract in Redesign, then I don't think you have a problem. If you've built a new contract, which would have a type of contract instead of legacy, then we would want to make sure we get stop dates on any of those.
Okay.
Yeah, Carrie, we don't have compensation stop dates on ours either.
And yours are mostly still legacy records as well.
Right, and I know that I did have to do the stop dates when I created like a MA15 step up on some of them, but not on just a conversion over when we did Redesign.
Right. So the conversion over, you don't have to worry about those. The programmers have taken care of you on that, as long as it's the legacy type. If you have anybody that is set up as contract at this point in time, we'd want to look at those and make sure they have compensation stop dates, excluding next year's work days.
Okay.
So Carrie, I guess I'm understanding then when you're setting up a new contract for someone, they need to have the first day of their calendar and then as their start date and the last day of their calendar as their stop date on their record.
Yes, for the most part. So the compensation start date, first work day, compensation stop date, last work day. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to building a new contract and we're looking at those compensation start and stop dates. The exception to that rule is thinking about like teachers who are paid over the summer. You don't want their compensation stop date to be their last work day in May or June. You want it to be like their last non-work day in August. Something out further. But we'll talk about that here a little bit more in a minute. If that's okay.
Yeah, because that'll be an issue, especially at our district, because they're paid and they're starting to work new days in August. So
Right. So we'll
we'll
talk
have an
that
overlap.
through. Yep, we'll talk that through. Okay, so hopefully everybody is comfortable adding days to their job calendars. If you have concerns about compensation stop dates, maybe after we get a little bit further through today's class, you'll feel a little better. But then after that, if you have specific questions, feel free to submit a ticket or give us a call and we'll look at specific scenarios with you gladly. The next step on the new contract checklist is to actually go into the new contract processing menu and look at the options that are in there. And there is one tip or caution that SSDT has shared is that when we're going into processing new contracts, that's to create a new compensation record. It's not to create or update a position record. So when you're looking at an employee, they have both that position record and that compensation record. So if there are any fields that are on the position record that need to change for FY22, those changes on the position record would need to be handled separately. So some of those fields on the position record that might change once in a while from year to year, like the pay group or the FTE or EMIS override fields. And Mary, of course, gets you a checklist for EMIS in the fall and in the spring. And so her fall EMIS checklist will have some reminders on it about verifying FTE and EMIS override fields. And just pointing out that if you're looking at this new contract area, which we'll go through next, and you're expecting to see like a field such as pay group to change for next year, that's elsewhere. That's on the employee's position record. So you might have to, in addition to going through this new contract process, you might once in a while have to go make a change on somebody's position record as well. Okay, so I went into processing new contracts and you see 3 tabs across the top. You see new contract maintenance, mass copy compensations, and import new contracts. So we're going to look at each of these. The checklist has these in a different order, but we're just going to work left to right. The new contract maintenance is similar to Classic's maint option on the new contract menu. So this is where you can go to create individual contracts one by one. You can create mid-year contract changes here. You can edit stuff that you have here ready for next year. You can see in my test database, we've been, importing or mass copying or creating new contracts. You could come here and view any of these, edit any of these, or delete any of these. This is just like in Classic, the new contract area. It's kind of like a temporary, like loading area. It's not really effective yet. It's not going to be effective until you activate. So you can also activate contracts from here. So if one of these was ready, you could check mark it, and then you have an activate option at the top of the grid. in addition to these normal buttons at the left. You could also select all. You could filter your grid down to a specific pay group and then select that pay group and activate one pay group at once. But we'll look at some more of those options. For now, I'll probably just, instead of deleting one by one, I'll probably just select all and delete everything from this new contract area in this test database, just so that right now I'm looking at a blank grid, which is more like what you guys will see when you come in here. So my new contract area is empty right now. And if I want to create an individual new contract for one employee, I'm going to start that by clicking this copy button. And then I'm going to find my employee and select which compensation record I am building that new contract for, and select the type of new contract. If you were processing a mid-year contract, you know, you have those same options that you are familiar with seeing in Classic. And that's going to load this page. It's copying all of that information in from the compensation record that you selected. So I selected the one that had FY21 in the label. So I'd want to go through any of these fields and make changes to get it ready for next year. So I might want to update my label. I don't need to update my dates because the system went ahead and did that for me. It tries to help you incrementing dates if it has a good guess at that. So just verify that, see if you need to update anything with the dates. This is where, you know, you might have to add compensation stop dates to employees for this new year for your first full year on Redesign. If you haven't used compensation stop dates in the past, they were not required in Classic, but since the Redesign is calculating contract work days based on this compensation date range, it is, you know, required or highly recommended in Redesign, because when you go to build those next year's calendars, you don't want it to add next year also. So that's why it's not like a required field that's going to require you to do it. So that's why I hesitate to say required, but it's kind of like required in the eyes of the programmers, even though they didn't program that in to require you to do it. So it's highly recommended. But you can see which fields are able to be updated, and the grayed out fields are manually calculated. So the contract work days, I guess I was highlighting the wrong field here. Sorry about that. The contract work days, those are pulling in from that calendar we just built. So the CLE job calendar that we added days to for FY22, the system is looking at this compensation start through stop date range and counting those for you and filling that in. So you would make any other changes for next year. You have a lot of fields that should hopefully seem familiar. Verify, you know, stretch pay is checked. That's your equal pay is yes from Classic. Maybe you need to increase this person's salary schedule step. Whatever the case may be, you can then click calculate, and it's going to calculate a unit amount in pay per period based on the changes that we made. Gives you an informational message that those two amounts were recalculated. You could verify those against your records, make sure it looks good, and click save. So let me just click edit again so those fields are hopefully a little bit easier for you to see. So the questions about compensation start and stop dates, they're related to the calendar because they're pulling in calendar work days from this start date to this stop date. So first work day to last work day. But you also want to keep in mind that this compensation start and stop date also influences when this compensation record is pulling into payroll. So the period beginning and ending dates that you are entering when running a payroll, those period beginning and ending dates are also looking for compensation start and stop dates to know which ones to pull in. So on the last pay of this contract, I'm going to want to make sure 6/30/22 is included in my period beginning and ending date range. On my first pay of this contract, I'm going to want to make sure my period beginning and ending date includes 7/1/21. And as you're thinking of first pays on contracts and last pays on contracts, you're normally paying attention to that and possibly having to do additions anyways. But so that's why I guess I say for the most part, it's the first day of work and the last day of work, but you also have to think about like a teacher whose last day of work is May or June, but you're still paying them through August. You want that compensation stop date to instead be like a non-work day in August, so that as you're running period beginning and ending dates of payrolls all summer, this compensation is still pulling in. So possibly think of it as either the last work day or the last non-work day before next year's first work day, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answers some of the questions about compensation start and stop dates. Are there any others at this point in time?
Carrie, it's Stacy. Where we run into an issue with the compensation stop date is when we're processing attendance 2 weeks behind, and especially during the school year. Say a cook retired February 28th, yeah, her last pay with us is going to be March 15th. That's when that compensation stop date becomes an issue, and I have to go back in and make adjustments after the 3/15 payroll because it's added earnings, it's added work days, etc.
And that's really just an issue because you're posting attendance on a different date range than your period initialization
Correct.
date range.
Correct.
Right. So I don't believe we're going to have a solution for that. So if it's the final pay that they're ever getting, it's probably just going to be best to try to post as much attendance as possible on that final pay instead of in arrears.
Yep.
I know that's not always perfect either.
Yeah, if I have a good idea of what maybe the first week looks like, I can try and post that, but 9 times out of 10, that's the only problem I have with that compensation stop date is because we look at attendance 2 weeks behind.
Okay.
So is SSDD looking to like modify that at all, or is that just going to be what it is?
There is actually an issue open that we might see by the end of this fiscal year. I do not believe it's going to change any fields on this screen, and it's not going to change how the period beginning and ending date and initialization works in looking at the compensation start and stop dates. But I think they're considering changing how the contract work days are calculated. And so possibly, I don't know the specifics yet because the programmers are still needing to work on it and develop it and see what works. But they have received lots of questions about this topic. And so they're considering having the contract work days possibly, like, even though it's auto-calculating when you're building the compensation record, maybe when you're adding the new days for next year, it's never going to recalculate unless you intervene. And they're possibly considering similar items with the pay per period auto-calculating and the unit amount auto-calculating. So they're just questioning really the auto-calculating pieces to see if changing that functionality might eliminate some issues. So if they make that change, whatever that change ends up being, we will have that in a release note. And my assumption is it would be sometime very late in June if they can get that. I know they're trying to get that done by the end of the fiscal year. So if you get a release email from us, just keep an eye on it to see if it says something about changes to the compensation record, because it may impact you guys as you're building these for next year if you don't have them built at that point in time. So unfortunately, I don't have specifics, but they are considering changes based on feedback. I just don't know what they'll be exactly yet. Okay, so we just looked at creating a new contract on the new contract maintenance tab for like one new contract record for an individual employee. Once I'm done and I have hit save on that screen, when I come back to my new contract grid, I have that new contract here that I can view, edit, delete, or select and activate at the proper time. I also, and we'll talk a little bit more about activating in a few minutes, but I also have an option across the top to mass copy compensations. This is similar to the build option in Classic. So a lot of you may have used this if you were ever on a pay freeze and you were just trying to quickly copy records from last year to this year and keep most people at the same dollar amount. Or you may have used this in Classic for your subs in order to update their job screens every year and get them reported to ODJFS new hire. This mass copy compensations will not work for your subs in Redesign. There's another method for achieving that option to re-report your subs to new hire each year. So we'll look at that in a little bit. But this mass copy option may still be helpful if you have a group of employees who are mostly staying the same, or if you are not using the import option, instead of going and adding each person individually to that last grid, you could still come here and pull in a group of employees, and what it's going to do is populate this group of employees onto that last grid that we were looking at. So you have options at the top. You can select by job status. You can include archived employees if you would need to. You can include compensations that are active as of a specified date. You can select specific pay groups. Let's see what we have here. So if I select my pay group for certified staff, I can scroll down and see who I would be including based on those selection options I made up above. And if I scroll down through this list, I do see that, I have somebody with a stop date on here. So I could probably get them excluded by saying include as of 7/1/20, and then that record with that stop date of 6/30/20 disappeared. I know this is a demo database, so our start dates right now are a couple years old. But you can use these fields up at the top to kind of filter your list at the bottom. And once you get the desired employees displaying, like in this preview area at the bottom, when you click build new contracts, it's going to send that information to that new contract maintenance tab. So just like in Classic, when you did the build option, it sent the information into new contract maintenance for you then to update further or verify from there. So we will want to enter a contract start and stop date of what we want it to be when it builds these records and sends them to the new contract maintenance tab. So we're going to we'll just do the full fiscal year and click build new contracts. We'll get a successful message, or if there was any issue that was encountered, it would display on your screen. Then if I go back to the new contract maintenance tab, instead of just having the one record that we had manually built, we have these other records here that we could update further. You can see that it went ahead and updated the compensation start and stop date based on what I entered. And, you know, if you were on a pay freeze or something, you know, you might just be done at this point in time. But if not, like I said, instead of copying every employee individually, maybe you populate your grid really quickly and then just come and edit the changes that need made. So the third option is the Import New Contracts tab. And I think a lot of you probably use the import option in Classic. So I really think this will seem similar. The difference is going to be how you're getting your data out. So if you maintained a spreadsheet on your own all year long and have that information in the same spreadsheet as you always had, then that spreadsheet can be saved as a CSV and uploaded here. If you always started your spreadsheet by running Safari, we have a couple different ways that you can do that to create your starting point. So this is where we'll come back when we have a file ready to upload. I'm just going to go show you a couple options for creating a spreadsheet if you don't have one already. So if we go to Core Compensation, you can go to the Contract Compensations tab. The first tab, All Compensations, includes contract compensations and non-contract compensations. And we're going to go to the Contract Compensation tab because that's what the new contract program works with, is contract compensations. So people who are set up like equal pays, yes, or they have a set obligation amount that you're paying them throughout the year, even if they're not equal pays, yes. The non-contract compensations are more like your timesheet employees or your subs. So you can see everything on all compensations. The other tabs just help you narrow down which group you're looking at. And then once you're looking at one specific type, you have different options with your More button. So one option for starting your spreadsheet is to come to like the contract compensations grid and use your More button to add different columns or remove columns that you don't need, but that, you know, that are displaying in your grid, but you don't need for your new contract import, and then add columns that you do need. So it looks like I've probably already come in here and done a lot of that, playing around with this at some point in time, but anything else that you would like to add to your grid, just remember, you know, you can uncheck something if you don't want it or check something if you do want it.
Carrie, is there a list of like in Classic, there were certain fields that we had to import or it wouldn't work? Is that the same here?
So there are 4 required fields. They are employee ID, job number, contract type, and compensation label. In the label, you sometimes can get by without it. It's really required depending on how many compensation records you have sitting out there for the employee. But those are the 4 fields, and so they are specified here for you in this SSDT checklist. And then any other fields you can add as you desire. But like most of you are also going to want to have obligation because once you say that it's like stretch pay, yes, it's a contracted job, you also need an obligation. So these are the minimum, and then there are others, but these are listed here as the minimum, and those are the headers. So once you get some fields in your grid that you believe are the ones that you need, you could go ahead and filter, based on pay group, which is what this code is here, based on compensation start date, based on job status. You can filter your grid however is helpful. Job status active, compensation start date. I just want the employees who were paid last year to be in my new contract import for this next upcoming year. Maybe you want to do it by pay group, but it doesn't look like I have a lot in my test database with recent dates. You can see with the compensation start date when I typed it in here, it pulled July 1st and anything after that. That's just how grid filters work with dates. If you wanted a specific date, you would have to add the equals. You could also do equals or greater than and get nope, I did that backwards. Greater than or equal to get the same results as what I did without those keys before it. But you would narrow down your grid to get the employees that you want in your spreadsheet and then click this report button. And you would send it, instead of to PDF, we're going to send it to Excel data. You don't have any query options because this report is coming from your grid. So your query options are basically the filters that you just put in your grid. So I'm just going to generate this to Excel data. And then those records that we're displaying in the grid are in a spreadsheet that you could use as your starting point. This is your information that's on the current compensation, and you could go through and update this information for the new year. So another option that we think you may like is to actually use a report that is in the report manager. So I'm just going to close out of this spreadsheet for right now. Well, before I jump and show you the report, let me go back to processing new contracts. We went to the core compensation grid. You could do the same thing from your new contract grid, which we'll talk about this option maybe in a little bit, because you might run a grid report from here working on salary notices. But let's go into the report manager. And everybody will see a report called LACA New Contract Compensation Worksheet Updated. So you can go through the option to pull information from a grid like I demoed, but I think you'll like this option because it's going to include a lot of those fields that you're looking for without you having to customize your grid to get there. So you can click Generate next to this LACA Contract Compensation Worksheet, and it's already going to populate for you that it's going to generate this to Excel data. So you can go to your Query Options tab and enter a compensation start date, a pay group. I don't know if you're going to want to send all of your employees to one spreadsheet or if you're going to do multiple spreadsheets per pay group. The one thing that if you used this last year, we did update this year so that the compensation start date, last year, if you specified July 1st, for example, it would only find those records that were exactly July 1st, 2020. And it would not include those dates that were in the future. So the mid-year hire employee would be omitted. So we modified this query parameter to select the date you enter plus anything newer. So if you ran into that issue last year, hopefully this will make this report a little better for you. But let's just go ahead and generate this. And this has that employee ID, job number, contract type, and compensation label, the 4 required columns in it for all imports. And then as I scroll over here to the right, it has a lot of those other fields that you're probably going to be interested in. You know, there's the obligation, pays and contract, salary schedule information if you need to update that. So we really think this will be a good starting point for you. If you have additional columns that you would like to see in this report, let us know and we can see if we can get those added. But we're hoping this is a pretty good starting point for everybody.
Hey, Carrie, it's Stacy again.
Mhm.
The new box that's on everybody's compensation record that's labeled code that was auto-populated, do we have to include that or will it auto-populate for us?
It's going to auto-populate on the new compensation record during this process through the new contract import and activation process. Whereas if you were importing into the utilities mass load option, you would need it. But in the new contract area, you do not need it in your
Great.
spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so again, those required columns are in here. The 1 contract type right now, everybody's is either going to come out as legacy if you were recently imported from Classic, or contract if the employee had a contract that was created in Redesign. And when we import this for a new contract, this should say new contract. I believe it can also have a number 4 in it, which was the option in Classic representing a new contract. I like the option though that, you know, you just have to remember, oh, it needs to say new contract without a space. So a capital N and a capital C, I pretty much type a word and I don't have to remember which number was that. So we do need to change that column to a new contract, and you would update anything else for the new year. The compensation label column, if you don't have anything in that column right now, SSDT's recommendation is to use that field to designate the fiscal year, so that when you're looking at multiple compensations on one employee, you can use this field to help yourself pick the correct one. And when you're keying pay and like future or current, that little compensation label is out there to the side. If you have information that populated over from Classic, some districts had pay stub descriptions in the field that this was in Classic, then you don't have to change that if you don't want their label on their pay stub changing along with this change. It's not required that you do that. It's just, you know, if that column is blank, that's a helpful tip that SSDT recommends. So as we scroll over here to the right, we would want to update our contract start and stop dates. You know, I do have my pay groups over here. So you guys know your pay groups probably and what their first work day is going to be. So hopefully that will help as you populate contract start dates, especially if you're going to run this by pay group. You could do the contract start and stop date the same for everybody in the spreadsheet, hopefully. And then this is where we might have to do like a future end of summer date for like a teacher. The contract workdays column is really here for your reference at this point, because remember, contract workdays are being calculated based on what's in the calendar. So you can update this if you want, but as of how the system is working right now and it's calculating workdays based on what it sees on the calendar, even if you populate something here, it's still going to look at the calendar and pull the days from the calendar. So that's why I'm kind of just like skipping over it. It's there for your reference at this point, unless the software change warrants that we start populating this field with days like we used to have to in Classic. So make any other changes for next year. And my calculations are probably not working out properly. I'm just increasing some amounts here. So we see some different information when we get into the software. So sorry if I'm not using like calculations that work out perfectly. Pays and contracts are all 24. So if you had a mid-year hire last year, remember you'd want to update that. Salary schedule, you may need to update that. Calendar start and stop date, like in Classic, you know, we normally don't mess with that. That's just there for your reference. The only other thing, how I pointed out right now, the contract work days, that column is here for your reference. The position description is also here for your reference, in addition to the pay group. Those two are pulling into this report from the position record, not the compensation record. So even if you make a change to the pay group column or the position description column, it's not going to make that change because when we upload this, it's only updating the compensation record. But we still thought it would be helpful for you to see that information in this spreadsheet for your reference. It's just not necessarily something that you want to update because it wouldn't be accomplishing what you would expect. So I've made some changes.
Gary, hold on.
Uh-huh.
The equal pays column
Oh,
also.
equal pays column. Thank you, Jake. This equal pays column comes out as true or false, and the import requires that to be a yes or a no. So if Jake wouldn't have pointed that out, we would have got an error message in a minute when we try to import this file. Okay, so let's save this. I did save it as a spreadsheet in case we need to open it back and make any other changes, but we need to save it as a CSV file to have it in the acceptable format for the import. So I'm going to save it as a CSV and then go back into the software and go into processing new contracts and go back to that import tab. And select my file. And you can enter a contract start date here if you need it to populate, but if you have the contract start date on everybody in the spreadsheet, it's not required. Click import, and we're going to get a results file at the bottom. We also see the totals here on our screen. One record was loaded and there were 3 errors. My guess is that I probably have some of the employees in my spreadsheet that I already populated into my new contract grid with the build option. So let's see if that's the case. Compensation not found for label FY22. So no, that's not the case. And I didn't pay attention Jodie Foster is probably the one that loaded. So I think I was using that compensation label wrong in this spreadsheet to update it with the new information, but it instead was looking at which compensation I wanted to pull in. So let me look at so most of them were FY21 records. One of them was blank. Okay, and I did go ahead and delete Jodie Foster since she successfully made it and we had one built there for her. So let's go ahead and try this again. Okay, we got 4 records to load, no errors. You do have a file always that generates that. I still recommend you go ahead and open, and it's blank because we have no errors. And when you go back to the new contract maintenance tab, we see Jessica Alba, Tom Hanks, Jodie Foster, and Andy Griffith. I think those were our 4. Added here to the rest of the grid. So then you can make any modifications like change the label for the new year, which I guess I was misusing that column in the spreadsheet. So I do apologize for that. The other thing, instead of having to go one by one, we also have a way for you to update that compensation record through a mass change. So my screen looks a little different here than what you guys see. Yours would look more like this. But you do have the option to update the new label, and I did not filter my grid at all. So it's going to update all 11 records in my new contract grid. Whoops, I didn't even type a correct fiscal year. Let's try that again. So instead of going one by one, you can use a mass change to update that label after you get information in here, if that is a field that you wish to update. And if you have not used mass change before, we would gladly walk you through that.
Carrie, can you mass update the description field since it won't take what's on the spreadsheet?
So, like the position description, or this
Yes.
just description?
That's a good question.
So the one that was in the spreadsheet was position description, like their job title was there for
Right.
your reference. The description field, did we have that in there? Do you use the description field for something?
I use the description field for the FY as well as the label field. I use them both.
Okay.
But it is just the description, not the position description.
There is not a mass change for it right now, but we can probably write one.
Oh, that'd be
And-
awesome.
And I don't know, you guys might even see it before me, but I don't know if that field was in here in our option or not, but even
Yeah,
if
it
it's-
is.
Okay, I was going to say, but even if it's not the mass change, we should be able to write a mass change script for you to just do it after you get them in here.
Okay.
So let me make a note of that. that we could work on a mass change for that description field as well.
Thank you.
And we could should be able to make it work just like that mass change that I just showed you, where you
Yeah.
could type in whatever you wanted.
That was super easy.
Okay, other questions about what we just saw? Okay, so at this point, we do have some information in our new contract maintenance area. We did some by creating one by one using the copy option. We used the mass copy tab to build several all at once, and we've used the import option. So we have all of this information sitting here in the new contract maintenance area that we think we have ready. So we should, according to our new contract checklist, next look at new contract reports to verify the information that we have out there and work on making sure everything balances to what we expect. So
Okay, I can take over from here, Carrie.
Okay,
Give you
yep.
a few minutes of a break here. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm using the same database that Carrie was using. So I'm going to go back to that processing new contracts grid that she was working out of, so that you can see the same employees are there. So as Carrie said, there are a few reports that you can use before you activate these new contracts. And keep in mind, you have to look at these reports before you activate, because they are going back and looking at the information from this particular new contract maintenance grid. So the first report that I want to look at that you can use just to verify the information that you've brought into Redesign and you may be used for balancing is in the reports menu. It's a canned report and it's called the new contract report. So looking at the new contract report, it has some options to sort the information. You can sort by pay group, which is probably the most popular, but there are other options as well. Maybe contract start date, just however you maybe want to see your information. So for this example, I'll sort by pay group. You can also include subtotals. So since we're sorting by pay group, you can also subtotal by pay group, which might help if you have a number that you're balancing from. If you have a specific contract start date that you want to look at, you can enter a date here. I want to look at all of the contracts for this example, so I'm just going to leave that blank. You can also select certain job calendars or specific pay groups if you want to look at something very specific. But I'm going to go ahead and generate this report just so you can see what it looks like. And again, this will look at the information on that holding grid that that Carrie populated earlier. So okay, so you can see that this basically lists all of the information that you brought in your new contract, import or creation, that you can just kind of look at. It's kind of bulky and difficult to look at. You're only going to get maybe 4 employees on a page. So if you've imported a lot of employees and a lot of new contracts, this is going to be a pretty lengthy report. But as I scroll down, you should be able to see that it's kind of crazy where the page break is. But for pay group 20, there is a subtotal that you can kind of look at and see if that's what you would expect. You'll see for pay group 24, there's another subtotal. So The report does work, but like I said, it is kind of bulky, but it does give you all of the information that you can kind of look at to see if what was brought into the new contract grid is what you expected. So that is the new contract report. Like I said, it can be sorted in other ways too. But for this example, I just used the pay groups. So, and again, that is found just under reports, new contract report. If you want to look at the information maybe in some different ways, there are other reports you can look at that also provide some other information as well. So those are held in the report manager. So if you go to the report manager, Carrie would filter her grid, but I'm just going to scroll down and you'll see 2 new contract reports that are listed for SSDT. The first one I'm going to look at is the new contract summary report. And what it's going to give you is something similar to what you may have seen in Classics new sum.txt report. And it's just going to show a summary of each new contract that you've imported into Redesign. It's going to be a little easier of a format to read. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. You can see that you can choose whether you want to run it in a PDF, Excel data, however you maybe want to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that so you can see what that looks like as well. So you'll see that's kind of a little easier to kind of see. You'll see several people on a page, and this is just maybe a way you can quickly look over employees to see if their contracts were built as you intended. There aren't a lot of options as far as sorting by pay group or filtering by pay group or anything like that, but it's just another tool that you might be able to use to just review information maybe a little quicker. If you want to look at, maybe number of pays, if something jumps out at you quickly, or I believe, contract type is on here. So, if there's something that, you want to look at, that might be a little easier to digest than the new contract report. This is another option you can choose. The other option in the report manager is the new contract pay account report. So if you want to, look and see what pay accounts are assigned to the new contracts, you can also see that here as well. And it didn't work. Carrie, do you have any idea why this report is not working?
I'm actually wondering if it has no data in it. Let me go in here and select an expenditure account on somebody and see if that changes it.
Okay. I do know that this report was working earlier today, so
Try now.
you're probably right.
I bet when I deleted all the records that were in there from our testing before, and then we've put new ones in there, I bet I've changed the results. No.
Nope. This is a useful report, so I want to show an example. Um, all right, let me work on something here just to see if I can get something on the screen here to show you guys what this would look like.
And Carrie and Jake, isn't it still true that you have to run all these reports before you activate the new contracts? Otherwise, the information's lost.
That is true.
Yeah, so anybody new to redesign, I learned the hard way, but you have to run the reports prior to hitting activate.
Do we have to run all of these reports or just the new contract report?
If you want to run these reports to verify information, you need to run them before you activate your new contracts.
Oh, okay. To whichever one we want. Okay.
Right,
got it.
which is really the same as classic. The classic reports were on the new contract menu, and they could only be ran while the data was in new contract as well, because it's just pulling from that new contract area.
Okay.
I did run this earlier today, so hopefully this is a good example of what it would look like. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So you would just have a listing of your employees, and to the right would be the pay accounts that that would be associated with those new contracts. So, so here's what that would look like, which I would believe that would work for you guys. I just think that's something that we broke in our database by deleting and putting in new information just today. So if you have any issues running that report, let us know. We'll try to figure out what's going on, but I think it should be okay for you guys. And then if you still have a need to look for, verify some information, or if one of these reports do not give you what you are expecting to find, or not good enough, you could also return to your processing new contracts grid. You can also create, a custom report from here. You may want to go to your More button and, as Carrie said earlier, possibly add, information. I think we've already got pay group on there, but if you ever wanted to add any pay information, oh, here we go. I think it's under contract. You could add pay per period, contract amount, contract obligation, whatever you would want to add to your grid. For whatever custom report or for whatever reason you want to balance or review information, add those to your grid. And then you could always run a report straight from here. So I can do that for you. You could filter on pay group however you want to do it before you run your report. Let's just say, I want to run a report just on pay group 20. I can do a report. If you want subtotals, you can run it as a PDF. And that's what you would have. So those are just a few tools you can use, after you've got the contracts kind of imported or built how you think you would expect based off of your import or your creation. So just to verify your information, and once you're happy with your numbers and happy with the contracts you built, you can move on to activating. So Carrie, do you want to take back over from here? Or does anybody have any questions on the reports that I've showed at this point?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we're back. You should be seeing my screen, probably the same place where Jake was in the new contract maintenance tab. So after you've ran all those reports and balanced and verified the information and you're ready, how you can activate, again, you can activate one by selecting an individual person and clicking activate, or you can activate like a pay group at a time by filtering your grid down to a certain pay group, and when it's time for them to be activated, you would, whoops, I clicked the wrong button, select all and click activate. So when should you activate? It's safe to activate the new compensation record when you've finished the final pay on the old compensation record and you're ready to start the next payroll. But Redesign, with those compensation start and stop dates, also allows you to activate sooner if you want, because those compensation records are only going to pull into payroll based on those compensation start and stop dates. So if you've been careful with the compensation start and stop dates, then you can control when last year's compensation record is pulling in versus this year's compensation record is pulling into a payroll with your period beginning and ending dates of that payroll. So if you think through your summer pays and what those period beginning and ending dates need to be for each pay group so that you're not including any FY22 work days in your period beginning and ending date of an FY21 contract payoff, then in theory, you could have that new compensation record out there activated ahead of time and waiting, and then it's just going to pull into the payroll when your period beginning and ending date includes that first workday. So we still recommend using the LACA purge worksheet, which I had a link to on the agenda and is also on the LACA website. So I'm here on the LACA website. On the fiscal services page, there is a link to payroll documentation. And on that payroll documentation page, we have the purge worksheet, actually in two places, in the fiscal year end section and in the new contract section. So you should be seeing that purge worksheet on your screen now. And we recommend you print this off and fill this out, or maybe you do this in Excel. We could also even send this to you in Excel, our version of it, if you'd like it. But think through all of your pay groups. When is the last pay on their FY21 contract? When is the first pay on their FY22 contract? What's the period ending date for that last pay so that you include all of last year's work days and none of next year's work days? And do you need to do additions to your payroll initialization in order to accomplish that? So you may have to do initialization additions on the final pay of the FY21 contract and on the first pay of the FY22 contract. So this just helps you plan that out. And I know this still says INI-CAL instead of initialization, and it still says purge instead of activate, but the concept is the same. So if you use this in Classic, it's kind of the same to think through this process and plan your additions for your summer pays. So as long as you have these planned out and then those compensation start and stop dates are carefully thought through, you could activate everybody all at once, and then those FY22 compensation records will just get paid on when the compensation start date pulls into your period beginning and ending date of the applicable payroll. But especially on the first year, if you're not that confident, you know, in your compensation start dates and stuff, you can still go the same route as Classic and purge like a pay group at a time before like their first pay of the new contract. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So You would just, like I said, filter your grid by pay group or whatever the desired filter is, select all and click activate. We'll go ahead and activate somebody here. We'll activate Sandra Bullock since she's first on the list. And you're going to get a pop-up on your screen that's going to ask you 2 questions. Do you want to lock in the paper period? And do you want to transfer the primary compensation flag to the new compensation? So lock in paper period. Next to the paper period, there's that checkbox that is overriding the paper period and locking it into that specific amount for every pay of the year until the final pay of the contract. Do you want to lock that in? If you have that checkbox already checked as desired on each individual compensation record, then you don't need to check this. But if you're like, I'm not sure if I checked that on everybody and I want the box checked on everybody, then you could check the box. If you uncheck the box, it's not going to uncheck the override paper period box on everybody. It's just going to leave each individual record as it was. So if it was checked, it'll stay checked. If it was unchecked, it'll stay unchecked on the individual record, if that makes sense. Then the transfer primary compensation flag. A lot of you probably don't use that yet. I think that primary compensation flag was new during this school year. And it's a way for you to select a specific compensation record. There's just a checkbox on there to set it as primary. And then you can use that when running reports or filtering grids to just pull somebody's primary compensation instead of having a compensation for teacher and coach and all kinds of stuff. You could say, this one is the primary compensation for this employee. So when I run reports for primary, this is what I want to see. So it would take a little time for you to go through and set that up. But if you have set that up, then this is the question. Do you want to transfer the primary compensation flag if you had it marked on the prior compensation to the new compensation? So if I had it marked, uncheck last year's and check this year's. So if you ever go through setting that up, that will be helpful. If not, if you have not taken the time to check mark anybody as a primary compensation, then this really isn't going to make a difference how you answer this question because there's nothing to transfer at this point in time. So let me cancel out of this and look at Sandra Bullock. So her override paper period is not checked. And we could go ahead when we activate, we could say, let's lock that in. And I don't think I have any primary compensation set in this database either. And activate this. And it's going to say the unit amount was calculated. The paper period entered does not equal. So we have some warnings we'd want to double check. One was activated. She's no longer in the grid. Sandra Bullock is no longer in the new contract area because we activated her record. And so if we go look at her compensation record at this point in time, she now has an FY22 compensation record. She still has her legacy compensation record for my position 1. And if we look at that, it checked the override paper period box for us. So the question there for whether or not you wanted to do that during activation. And here's that primary compensation check mark. If you're going to start using that, or if you have already started using that. And in addition to doing the check mark, you could add it in check mark primary. You could also use this checkbox. This is what you probably at least have all seen this here, this new grid button that was added sometime this school year to make one of these compensations primary. And here was that label. So if you're using that label, as you're looking at your grid, that might help you pick the correct compensation record for this position for this employee, because your compensation records are just going to continue to grow out here. So There will also be options to archive old compensation records. So once this legacy compensation record is done being paid on and done being reported to EMIS, you would be able to come in here and archive it. So you could edit it and archive it once you're done with it. That would also, and I guess if I just do that, let's say this one is paid off and no longer being reported to EMIS, you'll see it disappears from my grid unless I choose to include it. There is also a way to mass change that archive compensation flag as well. So that is probably something, since they've added that mass change, that is probably something we will add to one of our checklists, like a fiscal year end checklist, one of the post fiscal year end steps, or the EMIS fall checklist, one or the other. I'm not sure if we'll add it to EMIS or the fiscal year end one, which one we'll decide, but I just threw out EMIS as an idea because it does have an impact on EMIS. You don't want to archive a compensation that's still being paid on or still being reported to EMIS because it would interfere with both of those things. So you may not have done that before, but we will be probably adding some information to one of our checklists. So you'll see that going forward. So questions about activating new contracts after you have them in that new contract area, activating them, and then they're out here for you to see and pull into a payroll once you've activated. And you can see these two compensation records that I have here, my compensation start and stop dates. That's what's going to determine which payroll they're going to pull into based on my period beginning and ending dates of the payroll. Okay, so I'm not hearing any questions. If you try to fill out your purge worksheet and have more questions, let us know. We will gladly take a look at that and review that for you and let you know if we have concerns with anything that you've spelled out in your purge worksheet. But the next thing that we want to look at are non-contract compensations. So we've talked about contract compensations and running them through the new contract options. What if you have some non-contract compensations that you want to update for the new year? So you can go to the report manager and generate the non-contract compensation mass load extract, which, yes, sorry, I do filter down to try to narrow down my list. But you can find this SSDT non-contract compensation mass load extract, which is going to create an Excel spreadsheet that is a good starting point for you to update these non-contract compensation records. So I'll just go ahead and generate that so you can see that. And this is going to include all of the non-contract compensation records that are in my database. So this is huge. You're going to want to look at the results that pulled into your database and delete all of the records that you don't need to update. You can see some of the information that pulled in here into this spreadsheet. So since this has so much data in it, I'm going to go ahead and delete some. You would probably sort and filter this resulting spreadsheet to narrow down the supplemental contracts or substitute contracts, whatever it was you were trying to update for the new year, instead of just deleting a bunch like I did. But let's say we need to update just these two employees' non-contract compensation records for the new year. These are our two main substitutes. So we do see this code here that Stacy questioned a little while back, that new compensation code that you've started seeing in your databases. So this is in this extract file because we are not going to upload this into the new contract area. We're going to upload this into utilities mass load. So this, by leaving this code in here, it would make updates to the existing compensation record, or by modifying and entering a different code, it would add a new compensation record. So do you want to update the existing record or add a new? With substitutes, a lot of times you're probably just wanting to update existing because maybe you're just updating like the rate that you're paying them for this year. If for any reason these non-contract compensation records are reportable to EMIS, however, that would be a time that you maybe need to add a new compensation record for next year to leave the existing compensation record out there as it is to continue with your EMIS reporting. So just keep that in mind that you can control that with this code. This is going to update the existing ones that are out there. So I went ahead and updated the unit rate because we're just going to update their rate. And this is the compensation start date. So we could go ahead and put like the first day of school or something for them and see if that updates as well. But make whatever changes to these records as desired, and we will go ahead and save this. And it needs to be saved as a CSV for the mass load. And then we would go to utilities, mass load, browse and find that file. Select importable entity of compensation because we are importing this into the compensation records. And again, there are some details about this in that new contract checklist. The SSDTs, here's the non-contract compensation information, the report that I'm running as my starting point, and where I am going to upload the information, and picking that compensation option. So that all right there is documented in the checklist for you. So let's go ahead and load this. We have 2 records that loaded, no errors. So if I verify, this CSV file should be blank since I have no errors. So no errors, 2 records loaded. And then let's see if we can find one of these employees. Norman Rockwell. I think his was position 7 in that file. There's our compensation date of August 15th and his new unit amount of $150 a day. So we updated this sub record through that non-contract upload. If you don't have a lot of records to update, you also could just go to their compensation screen and edit and make the desired changes. If you are only needing to update an hourly rate or a daily rate for those non-contract like sub records, then you could go to core compensation. And there is also a mass change. Maybe it's on the non-contract compensation tab. No, we don't have it in our test database. I think in all of your databases, if you go to the compensation grid, you will see under mass change an option to update unit amount. So you could also update somebody's daily rate or hourly rate through mass change. And when we were talking about importing the information and talking about that compensation code that you could update existing records, which would be like editing, by changing the compensation code, we would have added another compensation record here. If you needed to do that and wanted to do that manually, you could use the create option instead if you didn't want to do it through the spreadsheet upload option that we demoed. The other thing that you want to think about is re-reporting all of those subs to ODJFS new hire. So because we thought about this at this point in time in Classic, I can show you a way that you can do that. If we go back and find that spreadsheet that we were working with from the non-contract records that we updated, you could use this same spreadsheet and add 2 additional columns to this spreadsheet. And these steps on what column headers to add to this spreadsheet and what information to populate in them, we have these spelled out in your fiscal year end checklist to remind you to do this. Because this, I don't believe this is addressed in the SSDT new contract checklist. So the ODJFS hire date column and the new hire reported ODJFS column. The hire date would be, for instance, like their first work day as a sub. And the new hire reported flag right now, they've been reported to ODJFS previously. So we are changing this to no, they're not reported at this point in time so that when you run that new hire report, they will pull in again. So these 2 columns and the employee number are the only 3 columns that we really need in order to make these subs be re-reported to ODJFS or re-reportable. So if I have these columns in here, and I'll go ahead and save this. And save it as a CSV for my import. So we're still, if I go first before I import this and show you what I'm going to update. On core employee, Norman Rockwell is one of my subs. And if I look at his employee record, which I'll click edit just to make it easier for you guys to see. If I scroll down, he has been reported to ODJFS already with an ODJFS hire date of 10/10/13. So this upload is going to uncheck the reported box and change his hire date so that he remains reportable. And the next time you run the ODJFS new hire report, he would get pulled in. And the same with Donnie Wahlberg, his information is going to update as well. But in order to update that, I just wanted to show you that before we do it. We're going to go to Utilities Mass Upload and browse and find our new hire CSV that we just created and select employee because we're importing to the employee record and click load. And we have errors. So let's see what those are. Okay, so I put N for not reported, and so I did that incorrectly. That needs to be true or false. So you actually should be able to work right here if I can type. Let's try this instead. So let's find our updated file, still importing to the employee record, and click load. 2 records successfully loaded, no errors. My error CSV file should be blank. Yep. And then I can go back and look at core employee, just so you can see that information updated. So that unchecked the new hire reported box and updated his hire date. So he's ready to be re-reported to ODJFS. If you don't have a lot of people to change, you could come in to core employee and just uncheck the reported box and update the ODJFS hire date to meet that requirement that your subs need to be reported each year because of the break in service. So again, the details on that are spelled out in your fiscal year end checklist. So I know I ran through that. I just kind of wanted you to be able to see it. And then one other comment about compensation records. If you're ever working with somebody's compensation record and maybe your activation timing wasn't perfect or your period initialization dates weren't perfect, and so somebody's compensation record is not correct, which let me find somebody, I guess, with a contract compensation instead of a non-contract compensation. If some information is not correct on your compensation record in a field that is not editable, so in a field that is grayed out, but you've realized the information is wrong, then when you're editing that compensation record, you do have the option to add compensation adjustments by clicking create and adjusting those calculated fields. So if their amount earned is off by a day, you can add the daily rate here, and it'll increase the amount earned that's displaying accordingly. So once in a while, we had to clean up that stuff in Classic if something didn't happen right. So if you encounter something like that in Redesign, I just wanted to show you where that option is. But if you have questions about that, or if you're questioning what you're seeing, you can feel free to call or submit a ticket, and we would look at that with you as well. Okay, any questions on new contracts? So the next thing that we want to do is talk about salary notices. If you're interested with creating a spreadsheet from Redesign and mail merging that to a Word document, either to print or to email. So we will walk you through those steps, but why don't we take a 5-minute break first? And we'll start salary notices in about 5 minutes. Okay, so the agenda that we looked at today, there is a link to a salary notice document that is on the LACA website, which should hopefully help you with this process. If you are looking for a way to do that, maybe you have a separate way that you handle salary notices completely separate from Redesign and you didn't rely on Classic or Safari. But like if you relied on using Safari to pull information out of Classic and then mail merge that information to Word, we can show you the options that you have with Redesign. So this document should help you with that process. The first 2 pages talk about the steps that are done in Redesign. The next 2 pages talk about the steps that are done in Word. And then the last 2 pages are tips if you are having issues with the formatting of numbers in your mail merge documents. So I hope that document will be a useful resource, and we are going to go ahead and look at that today in our demo database. So just like we looked at creating a spreadsheet from multiple options in the redesign for our new contracts, you can create the spreadsheet several different ways. You can go to like core compensations and extract a grid report for a starting point of a spreadsheet, or you can go to processing new contracts if you've already populated next year's new contract information in this area, and you could run a grid report from here. Or you can also start with that same report that we started from with your new contract spreadsheet. So that was in the report manager. Oh, I went to the wrong screen. I apologize for that. And that LACA new contract compensation worksheet updated. This is the same one that we recommended as a starting point for your new contracts. It could be the same starting point for your salary notices. So enter your query options as desired, get your data out here into this spreadsheet and update it for the new year. And remember, we did that earlier today when we were working with new contracts. So really, if I go out here and find this Excel spreadsheet that we updated on today's webinar, I can close out of the one. It has the Sandra Bullock record in it that we purged today, that we activated today, but here's the one that we were working with from that same report from the report manager that we had already updated with some FY22 information. So in theory, if you already have this out there, you can just use this spreadsheet as your starting point for salary notices. So I know I ran through those options really quickly, but we kind of already saw them earlier. So any questions on getting a spreadsheet for a starting point for salary notices? Okay, so looking at the options in Word, if you want to mail merge this spreadsheet to a document that's going to be your salary notices, I do have a sample salary notice in a Word document. And you guys probably already have some sort of template that you use. If it is in Word, then you can mail merge this to any spreadsheet and pull all of that information in very quickly to either print or email your notices to your employees. So I opened my sample salary notice and have some text in here that is right now populated with one employee's information. I have like a watermark LACA logo in the background that you might be able to see. You would make any changes to update this, and then we could merge this to our spreadsheet to pull in the individual employee information. So in order to mail merge, if you've never done that before, we're going to go to mailings and start mail merge. And I like the step-by-step mail merge wizard. And are you working on printing letters or sending email messages? So I'm going to go through the letters option first, and then we can backtrack and look at the email message option if you're interested in sending your notices by email. But this is what's going to determine that. Are you going to print these letters or email them? And then I click next. And what document do you want to use? Do you want to use the current document? I do, because I already have my information typed up in here. Or did you open Word just with a blank document and you need to go navigate to that document that you have the information in? If that's the case, you could say start from existing document, and that will let you go browse and find that other document that you have saved out there. So I already have my current document with some text populated. So I'm just going to hit next. And then I get this question: who are your recipients for this mail merge. So I would like to use an existing list. This spreadsheet that I have, and if I go ahead and close out of it just so we don't create any issues, I'm going to browse and find that list, that spreadsheet. So that was my Excel version of my FY22 contracts. And we are going to go ahead and click OK. If I had more than one tab in that spreadsheet, you know, so maybe different tabs for each pay group, you would have had to select which tab you were wanting to work with. But I just have one tab in that spreadsheet, so I didn't have to make a selection. Then I see those employees that are in that spreadsheet. And right now they're all selected. I could just select a few if I'm only doing salary notices for some, or select all. Whatever the case may be, make your selections and click OK. And then I can click Next, write my letter. And this is where I can customize this mail merge document with mail merge fields from my spreadsheet. So I'm not sure that these merge fields that I have in here from last year are the same headings that are in my file this year. So I'm going to go ahead and click more items and take a look and see. So I'm assuming that I don't have this quite right, but let me place my cursor where I want to insert first name and insert first name and insert last name and close. And then I could get rid of these old ones that my titles weren't quite the same in my spreadsheet last year. But you just go through and insert the merge fields, which are based on the headings in your spreadsheet. And I don't know that I pulled in address information. So that's one thing that I guess we would have to pull in as well, but I did not have that in my spreadsheet. And I'll go ahead and update this to be next year. And then we are looking for contract amount. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm basically, so if you were starting from just a plain Word document, you wouldn't be removing old merge fields from last year, but I'm removing old merge fields from last year plus adding their replacement. So contract start date by just placing my cursor where I want that field to be and selecting insert. Okay, so once you think you have all of the merge fields populated and all of the text the way that you want it, you can click next to preview your letters. And you're going to see the information for the first employee in your spreadsheet. So you can prove that. I do see there's some odd rounding going on with my dollar field here, my dollar amount field. And that's one of those things that we address in those last 2 pages of that Word document that we have out there on the LACA website, where we tell you how you can fix this formatting if you're encountering it like you are here. And just proof everything else. If everything looks good, we can click next to complete the merge. One other thing, I guess, You can also advance through different employees up here using this option and preview every employee individually on the screen. Or if you click next to complete the merge, I like this next option, the edit individual letters. And if you do all and click OK, it opens a separate Word document with 1 page per employee. So I like that option. The other option, though, you could advance through each individual employee's record on the screen. But once you have these records here, you could print this and mail it to your employees, or whatever the case may be, save a copy of this for your records. You could also click this print option to send the merged document directly to your printer. So if I would prefer to email these salary notices to my employees, I'm going to back up here by using my previous option at the bottom and select email messages. So when we came into this document and selected letters, instead we're going to select email messages and then starting document, and it's going to kind of start looking like an email instead of a Word document. And next, select recipients. It's telling me that I'm already linked to a database. I could select a different list, or we did select that already, so this should still be linked. I have these different merge fields that I can insert as well if need be, but we did fix those last time. Preview the email messages. Here's the employee, what it's going to look like. I can page through the different recipients and verify the information and then complete the merge. Now, this one doesn't have that option to like preview each individual record. You're just going to click email and tell the system who you want to email this to, which is one step that I guess I overlooked previously. So we're going to back up here. I'm sorry for the sidebar. So in my FY22 contract spreadsheet, I did not have anybody's email address in here. So if we were to add a column for email address, you could populate every employee's email address, which if you were doing a lot of employees, you could run a grid report from the core employee grid to pull out like the employee ID, the employee name, and the email address. And we could VLOOKUP the information into this spreadsheet. We could pull the email address into the same spreadsheet. And we do have instructions on our website for using VLOOKUP if you're not very familiar with that. But you could very quickly pull in every individual's email address into this spreadsheet. If this is the first time you've ever sent salary notices by email, I would suggest testing with a few employees and doing something like this, putting your own email address in the spreadsheet of a few employees so that you can send these emails to yourself and see what they're going to look like and make sure you did everything the way that you wanted. So once I add this email column, then let me cancel out of here and go back to the spreadsheet and select a different list and find that spreadsheet that we just added the email address to and select it. It's on that first tab. Here are my employees. And then continue through. So I apologize for that. But next, write your email, add your email message, preview your email message, review your recipients, and complete the merge. So now when I click electronic mail, I have an option to select any column that was in my spreadsheet as the email address. So I know that the column that I had a header of email for was everybody's email address. So I'm going to send these messages. Each line is going to go to their own email address, which I populated right now with my own email address for testing. But each individual line of information would go to the email address on that line by selecting that column here. And then your subject line is going to be the subject of the email. So whatever you want that email subject to be. And then your options for mail format are HTML, plain text, or attachment. So I think you're probably going to like either HTML or attachment. And the HTML is going to leave the text right in the body of the email. And the attachment is going to attach a Word document to the email. So the Word document is kind of nice because it might preserve some of your formatting. Like if you have stuff centered, if you have a logo in there or something, it's going to preserve that a little better. But you also have to think about your staff. Like, are they sitting there opening these notices on a phone? You know, because if that's the case, maybe the HTML option is more user friendly. So you just can decide which you prefer. And I suggest, if you've never done this before, testing so that you can see what the HTML looks like and what the attachment looks like. So you make your selection, and then do you want to send everybody's right now, the current record that's displaying behind you, or, you know, record 1 and 2. If you had all of your employees in the spreadsheet and you just wanted to test the first couple to send to yourself, you know, then you wouldn't be receiving tons of emails. But I'm going to cancel, and I'm just going to show you what these would look like so you can get an idea of that if you have never done this before. If you are doing the HTML option, it would look something like this as they open that email. You can see like the logo's not perfectly centered, but everything's readable right in the body of the email. And the mail merge option with the attachment is going to actually have a Word document attached and no wording in the body of the email. You can see the subject line, but your users would have to open that Word document. So they'd have to have Word on their computer if you're sending that option. So if your district uses Outlook, this will then store a copy of the sent emails in your Outlook sent folder of the user who sends it. Since Microsoft Word and Microsoft Outlook, they're both Microsoft programs, they work together and they're nice in doing that. If your district uses Gmail, the process is a little different, and we do have some instructions on our website when we worked with the district who was sending these by Gmail. But I will say that I don't have Gmail, so this date on here, June 16th, that's the last time we had somebody like test this. So there may have been slight changes in Gmail. So if you are going the Gmail route and encounter an issue, call us and we'll try to figure that out with you. If you are using Outlook, there's this document out there that helps you a little bit with those mail merge steps specifically related to Outlook, in addition to the document that we have for extracting the information out of for Redesign and merging in Word. So these 3 documents will be helpful for you if you're trying this. So whichever your email is, Gmail or Outlook, and then the other document. And then if you're needing to get email addresses into a spreadsheet from another spreadsheet, VLOOKUP will be helpful. So if you haven't used VLOOKUP, there's an instruction document on that. Okay, so questions about salary notices? You may have a completely different way that you do salary notices, and that's fine. We just wanted to give you an option if you don't know how you're doing them at your district this year. So that is all that we have prepared today. So if anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to look into those. And if not, I do appreciate your time and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.